I still remember the exact moment I met Erin. It was spring 2012, and I was at a friend's engagement party I had nearly skipped. I'd just come off a grueling work week and was debating whether to show up at all, but I figured an hour of free wine and small talk wouldn't kill me. Turns out that hour changed my life. She walked in wearing this burnt orange sundress that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. I remember that because it wasn't the kind of dress you forget. She had this way of looking at people, not just glancing, but really seeing them, and when our eyes met, it felt like being hit by something warm and electric. Erin had this big, expressive laugh, and I think that's what got me first. Not her looks, though she's beautiful, not even the way she carried herself, just that laugh. It was loud and genuine and completely unapologetic. We struck up a conversation near the drinks table over a mutual dislike for cheap Pinot Grigio, which is exactly what they were serving. I told her I preferred red, she told me she preferred whiskey, and somehow we ended up tucked into the corner of the patio for over an hour talking about books, travel, and the weird dreams we both kept notes on in our phones. She worked in education, high school English, and I was building out a software consulting firm at the time, just starting to gain some traction after a few years of hustle. After the party, we went out for late-night pancakes. Neither of us was really hungry. It was just an excuse to keep the conversation going. I remember sitting in that half-empty diner, watching her animatedly retell some ridiculous classroom story, and thinking, I'm going to fall for this woman. And I did. Fast and hard. We were inseparable within a month. The kind of couple people either found adorable or sickening. Weekend farmers markets, movie marathons on the couch, long walks with no destination. We had this habit of leaving each other little notes on the mirror and each other's bags, tucked into books. I still have some of those tucked in a box somewhere. I don't know why I've kept them all this time. We moved in together after a year. At that point, it just made sense. There wasn't any of that back and forth drama you hear about with other couples. No, should we or shouldn't we? It just felt natural. She had this quirky little apartment on the top floor of a historic building downtown. Exposed brick, too many plants, creaky wood floors that drove me nuts, but she loved. We made it our own, combined our mismatched furniture, painted the bedroom a weird shade of blue she swore was soothing, and started building a life that, to anyone looking in from the outside, probably looked pretty ideal. We cooked dinner together most nights, unless we were too tired and defaulted to Thai takeout and Netflix. We traveled when we could, nothing exotic, mostly road trips up the coast or to small towns we'd never heard of. Our thing was finding little antique shops or bookstores and getting each other the weirdest or most sentimental item we could find under $10. Looking back, those early years felt like such a soft place to land. It wasn't always exciting, but it was deeply comfortable. Familiar in the best kind of way. We laughed a lot. We fought, sure, over dumb stuff like whose turn it was to do the dishes or why I always left the bathroom light on. But we always worked through it. There was effort, but it didn't feel hard. That's what I remember the most. It was the kind of relationship that made me feel like I'd finally arrived somewhere, like I could stop searching. And for a long time, I thought I had. Once Erin and I moved in together, life took on this quiet, steady rhythm that I came to depend on more than I realized at the time. We were both the kind of people who liked structure. Mornings started with the same sleepy shuffle to the kitchen. She always got to the coffee first, mostly because she insisted I made it too strong. I'd wake up to the smell of toast and the clink of her spoon against the mug as she stirred in way too much sugar. That was our version of normal, and it fit us. Work kept us busy during the week. Erin was dedicated to her students in a way that I admired. She'd spend late nights grading essays and prepping lessons, and when I'd ask why she went above and beyond, she'd just shrug and say, they deserve someone who cares. That stuck with me. She was passionate, principled, the kind of person who made other people feel like they mattered. I was running operations for a mid-sized tech firm I helped build with a college buddy. It wasn't glamorous, but it was growing fast. I was good at strategy and people management. Erin used to say I had a calming CEO energy, which I think was her way of saying I didn't freak out when stuff hit the fan. She liked that about me. Said it balanced out her tendency to spiral when things didn't go to plan. We had our weeknight rituals. Mondays were always lazy, leftovers or takeout, curled up on the couch half watching something we'd both seen before. Wednesdays we cooked a new recipe together, usually something from one of Erin's food blogs, which meant a lot of wine and a lot of laughing over burnt garlic or experimental sauces. Fridays we often stayed in, made popcorn, and played board games or watched old movies. Erin loved anything with Audrey Hepburn or an overly dramatic violin soundtrack. I tolerated it for the way she'd narrate the entire thing with commentary, like she was a one-woman director's cut. On weekends, we became the couple that hit the farmer's market early, grabbed breakfast burritos, and then split off. She'd look at flowers and artisanal candles while I browsed coffee stands or records. Then we'd meet up again, arms full of stuff we didn't plan to buy, but somehow needed. It was simple, predictable in the best way. We also traveled. Not far, not often, mostly weekend trips. We had a soft spot for quiet places, mountain cabins with fireplaces, small lakeside towns where the biggest attraction was an old bookstore or a coffee shop with mismatched mugs. I remember one trip to Asheville where we got reined in for 2 straight days and didn't leave the Airbnb except to grab groceries. We played cards, slow-cooked chili, and listened to jazz on a tiny Bluetooth speaker. It sounds boring when I write it out, but in the moment, it felt like exactly where I was supposed to be. That was how our life went. Not perfect, not cinematic, but real, consistent, built on the kind of intimacy that comes from truly knowing someone, their moods, their favorite brand of toothpaste, the way they like the sheets tucked or untucked at their feet. There's a kind of comfort that comes from that day-to-day closeness, from someone knowing the little details without needing to ask. That's what I thought we had. A life that worked. A love that was steady, if not always loud. A partnership with deep roots. And for a long time, I truly believed that was enough. By the time we got engaged, it didn't feel like a surprise, more like the next chapter in a story that had already found its rhythm. I proposed on a quiet morning in early fall, nothing fancy. We were out hiking, a trail just outside the city that she loved because the trees turned this brilliant gold every October. I didn't do the big speech, just stopped her in the middle of the trail, pulled the ring out of my jacket, and said, "You know this already, but I want to spend the rest of my life with you." She laughed first, then cried, and then nodded before I could even get down on one knee. We got married the following spring. It was a small wedding, backyard, strings of lights, tacos and margaritas instead of steak and wine. Neither of us cared about the pomp and tradition. What mattered was having the people we loved in one place. I remember Erin barefoot on the dance floor by the end of the night, hair falling out of its braid, laughing with her sister while her aunt tried to start a conga line. It was chaotic and imperfect and perfect. Married life settled into something that felt familiar. Not much changed at first. Same apartment, same jobs, same routines. But there was a shift, a deeper sense of being tied together, legally and emotionally. Our arguments felt different, too. Not more intense, but heavier in a way, like every disagreement was now framed by the understanding that this was it. We'd chosen this, chosen each other, and that meant learning how to live with the sharp edges as much as the soft ones. We started talking more seriously about the future. Kids were part of that conversation, though we weren't in a rush. Erin was practical. She wanted to pay off her student loans and get through a few more school years before making any big changes. I respected that. I wanted kids, eventually, but I also didn't mind having a little more time with just the two of us. Traveling, building our savings, figuring out what kind of home we wanted to grow into. We bought a house the year after our wedding. A 2-story place in a quiet neighborhood, nothing extravagant, but it had a yard for the dog we swore we'd adopt and a spare room we both knew might one day become a nursery. We spent months decorating it together, fighting over paint swatches and whether the couch should face the TV or the window. I won that one barely. She made the place feel like home. Candles in every room, little dishes by the sinks for rings and hair ties, mugs with sassy sayings that appeared in the cabinet overnight. I'd come home from work some days and find her curled up in the sunroom grading papers, wrapped in a blanket like she was part of the furniture. It wasn't just a house. It was ours, built on our inside jokes, our fingerprints on every wall. I think what I miss the most about those years is the certainty. Not in some grand, sweeping way, but in the little day-to-day things. The morning routines, the quiet dinner conversations, the way we moved around each other in the kitchen like we were choreographed. I knew her rhythms. She knew mine. There was comfort in that kind of knowing, a peace that settled in your bones when you believed, truly believed, that you were building something together. And I did believe it. With everything I had. We'd been married almost 4 years when Erin found out she was pregnant. I still remember how she told me, not with some grand gesture or surprise reveal, just a quiet moment on a Tuesday night. I had just gotten home from work, dropped my bag by the door, and she was sitting at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea, staring at me like she was trying to read my face before I'd even said anything. "I'm pregnant," she said, simple and steady, like she'd rehearsed it a dozen times in her head. Then her voice cracked. "It's real." I double-checked. And just like that, the air in the room shifted. I sat down across from her, reached for her hand, and we just looked at each other in stunned silence. Happy. Scared. Both. The next few months were a blur of appointments, baby books, and name debates that we'd start late at night in bed and never really finish. Erin dove into pregnancy with the kind of focus and intensity she brought to everything she cared about. She was meticulous, tracking every symptom, reading articles, organizing lists and folders. I mostly just tried to keep up, to be helpful, to show up. I wasn't perfect. I'd forget which trimester food rules applied to what. I overcooked the salmon once and she didn't speak to me for half an hour. But we laughed a lot too. We took a birthing class that made us both feel like nervous kids at a school assembly. She started craving watermelon at 10 p.m., and I once drove to 3 stores trying to find some in December. Those things don't sound like much on their own, but they're etched into my memory like snapshots from a life that was about to change forever. Our daughter, June, was born in early spring, a tiny, wrinkled, furious little thing with my ears and Erin's mouth. The delivery was long and rough. Erin was exhausted, drained in a way I'd never seen her before. But when they handed her June, she just crumpled into tears. I didn't know you could love someone so fast, so completely. Not just the baby, I mean Erin too. Watching her become a mother flipped some switch in me I didn't know was there. The first weeks were a haze. Sleep-deprived, messy, loud, and somehow still magical. We'd take turns walking the baby around the living room in the middle of the night, whispering lullabies, swapping bleary-eyed jokes like survivors in a foxhole. Erin was incredible, patient, instinctive, fiercely protective. I was proud of her. And honestly, I was proud of us. We were tired and frayed and figuring it out one chaotic day at a time, but we were doing it together. But somewhere in that stretch of newborn life, things began to shift in subtle ways. I couldn't have told you what was changing, not then. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a slow, creeping sense that we were no longer orbiting each other the same way. Our conversations became more functional than personal feeding schedules, bills, doctor visits. She started going to bed earlier, falling asleep with June in the rocking chair. I'd find her there sometimes, curled up with the baby in her arms, the TV playing on mute in the background. We were still us, still laughing, still making it work, but something was starting to drift beneath the surface. I told myself it was normal. Parenthood rewires everything. The exhaustion alone can turn even the strongest connection into a series of to-do lists and silent nods. At the time, I just chalked it all up to the adjustment phase. The sacrifice. The temporary chaos of early parenthood. And I believed that. I really did. After June turned 1, life was supposed to start feeling more manageable, or at least less like constant triage. She was sleeping through the night, daycare was working out, and Erin had gone back to teaching part-time. On paper, everything was settling into place. But I started noticing little things. Not dramatic, not even obviously wrong. Just different. Erin had always been expressive, animated, the kind of person who turned everyday stories into theater. But lately, her energy felt elsewhere. She'd trail off in the middle of conversations, get snappy over nothing, or just drift into silence halfway through dinner. I chalked it up to work stress, or sleep deprivation, or maybe just the normal wear and tear of being new parents. Still, it lingered. One night, we were folding laundry together, something we used to make a game of, racing to finish first, and I made a dumb joke about how June had more outfits than the two of us combined. Erin didn't even look up. Just said, "Yeah, babies grow fast," in this flat, distracted voice. It wasn't a big deal. Not really. But it stuck with me. That's how it started, not with a big event, but with a collection of small absences. She started staying later at work. Sometimes she'd text me, "Grade meeting ran long," or "got pulled into a parent conference," and I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was a teacher. That stuff happens. But over time, it became routine. She'd miss dinner twice a week, then 3. I'd be feeding June alone, giving her a bath, reading to her while Erin's car still wasn't in the driveway. I didn't complain. I figured she needed the space. Being a working mom isn't easy. I've always known that, and I wanted to be supportive. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice how she stopped sharing the details of her day. Erin used to come home and unload. Every awkward student moment, every staff room drama, every oddly specific snack craving from the teacher's lounge. Now, when I asked how her day went, she'd smile too quickly and say, "Fine. Just long." And the physical closeness? That faded in ways I didn't want to admit. We still slept in the same bed, still had the same nighttime routines. But it felt polite. Like roommates who knew how not to bump into each other. I'd reach for her in bed and feel her body stiffen before she shifted slightly away. Not every time, just enough to notice. I didn't bring it up. I wasn't even sure what I'd be bringing up. A feeling? A hunch? That's not something you throw on the table casually. We had a toddler, a mortgage, a rhythm. You don't rock the boat over a vague discomfort you can't put into words. But I started lying awake at night more than I used to, listening to the sound of the baby monitor, watching Erin's silhouette as she scrolled through her phone beside me, the screen casting that cold, ghostly glow on her face. She used to read novels before bed. Now it was always her phone. When I asked who she was texting, she'd say, "Just Casey from work," or "Nobody important." And I had no reason to doubt her. Still, something about the way she angled her body away, the way she tilted the screen slightly, it made something inside me tighten. Was I imagining it? Overthinking? Turning exhaustion into paranoia? I didn't know. But I started noticing her more, not in the way you admire someone, but in the way you try to decode them. The pause before she answered questions. The shift in her voice when I said I missed her. The way she seemed more alive when she was getting ready to leave the house than when she came home. I wasn't suspicious. Not yet. But I was uneasy. And that unease started growing roots. It's strange how routines, the ones you used to depend on, can start to feel like traps once something inside them shifts. Our life, from the outside, probably looked the same. We still had our nightly routines, dinner, bath time for June, the same 3 bedtime books she always insisted on in the same order. Erin would sing to her softly while I stood in the doorway watching, pretending not to memorize every second. That part never stopped being beautiful. But after June was down and the dishes were done, that quiet togetherness Erin and I used to slip into, it just wasn't there anymore. We'd end up on opposite sides of the couch, she on her phone, me half watching something I didn't care about. The space between us felt louder than whatever was on TV. When I reached for her, she'd smile, a small, tired thing, and either say, "I'm wiped," or "Not tonight, babe." I understood. Being a mom is no joke. She worked, she parented, she needed rest. But it wasn't just about sex. It was about us. And something in us felt like it was slipping out of reach. One night, I asked if she wanted to have a date night that weekend. Just us. Dinner, maybe a movie, anything to press pause and feel like a couple again. She hesitated, then said, "I think I already made plans with Casey." When I asked if we could reschedule, she said, "We're just so busy lately, it's hard to carve out time." I nodded, said I understood. But I didn't really. Casey was a coworker, someone Erin had mentioned now and then. They weren't close before maternity leave, but apparently they'd gotten tighter afterward. I'd never met her, never seen a picture, but Erin had mentioned her enough that I could picture the name like a placeholder in the story I was trying to understand. The following week, she was out 2 evenings in a row, once for a curriculum planning meeting, and the next night for a drink with Casey to decompress. I didn't argue. I watched June, cleaned up, waited for her to come home, and tried not to glance at the clock as much as I did. When she walked in close to midnight that second night, she smelled like citrus and wine. She kissed me on the cheek and said, "Sorry, we lost track of time." Then she went straight to shower, humming some unfamiliar melody. I know how ridiculous it sounds to be bothered by a song, but in that moment, it felt like she brought a piece of another world home with her, one I wasn't invited into. I started replaying things in my head more than I care to admit. Conversations that used to feel ordinary suddenly seemed layered. The way she'd shrug when I asked about work. How fast she flipped her phone face down when she wasn't using it. The sudden interest in new clothes, new perfume. Things that had explanations. Things I wanted to believe had explanations. It wasn't just about her. It started affecting me, too. I was more distracted at work. I found myself checking my phone more often, hoping for a message from her that felt warm, personal. Something like what we used to send each other back when "I miss you" didn't feel like a lifeline thrown across a widening gap. There were still moments that felt normal. Good, even. She'd make me laugh, or surprise me by bringing home my favorite pastries on a Saturday. And I'd think, "See? It's just a phase. You're overthinking this. You're tired, that's all." But then I'd catch her looking off into space with this expression I couldn't read, or hear her laugh at a text, then turn the screen away like it was instinct. It wasn't enough to call it anything. It wasn't proof. It wasn't betrayal. But it was doubt. And doubt has a way of turning even the smallest details into questions you're scared to ask out loud. I don't know when exactly I crossed that invisible line from wondering to watching. I didn't wake up one morning with a plan, and I certainly didn't feel good about the idea when it started creeping into my head. But over time, that dull unease in my chest started hardening into something sharper. Not anger. Not yet. More like quiet dread. Like I was living in a house where all the furniture had been subtly rearranged, and I kept bumping into things I used to navigate in the dark without thinking. Erin had always valued her independence, and I'd always respected that. I never wanted to be the guy who hovered, who monitored, who checked in with suspicion instead of affection. But lately, she'd become more distant in a way that felt curated. Our conversations were thinner, edited. When she talked about her day, it felt like she was giving me highlights from a version of it that had been sanitized for my benefit. I'd ask a question about a student or a staff meeting, and she'd fumble through an answer like someone trying to bluff their way through a story they hadn't memorized. And still, I said nothing. I convinced myself it was just stress, that we were both stretched thin, that I needed to give her space, not pressure. But space, I was learning, can become a void if you never meet each other in the middle again. One evening, after June had fallen asleep and Erin had left to clear her head with a long drive, I found myself standing in the middle of our bedroom feeling something I hadn't felt in years, excluded. Like a guest in a life I helped build. I sat on the edge of the bed, stared at the neatly made sheets, and realized I hadn't actually shared this room with my wife, really shared it, in weeks. Maybe months. She came home later, showered immediately, and slipped into bed with a quick peck on my forehead like she was checking something off a list. I pretended to be asleep. The next morning, I ordered 2 small cameras online. Nanny cams, disguised as air fresheners. I told myself it wasn't about spying, it was about sanity. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. In fact, I hoped to find nothing at all. What I wanted was to feel like I wasn't losing my mind. I needed something more solid than a feeling. Because feelings were starting to betray me, twist everything sideways, blur the line between caution and paranoia. I waited until Erin had taken June to her mother's for the weekend, something she'd done twice now, without inviting me. I used the time to install the cameras quietly, tucked away in places I knew Erin never paid attention to, the corner bookshelf in our bedroom, the nightstand in the guest room, a second one in the hallway just outside. Nothing fancy. Nothing obvious. I didn't tell anyone, not a friend, not a sibling, not even my own reflection. It felt like a confession just to consider it. Afterward, I sat on the living room couch in silence. I wasn't proud. I wasn't excited. If anything, I felt like I'd crossed into a version of myself I didn't recognize. But I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. I needed to see it for what it was, whatever it turned out to be. That night, Erin came home in better spirits than usual. She kissed me a little longer, even made a joke during dinner that made me laugh. We put June to bed together, read Goodnight Moon in unison, and shared a moment that almost felt like before. I went to bed hopeful, even a little guilty. Maybe I had misread everything. Maybe I was the one unraveling. But somewhere deep down, a part of me knew. Something had shifted. And soon, whatever had been lurking beneath the surface, whatever had been growing in the shadows of our silence, was going to step into the light. The footage sat untouched on my laptop for 3 days. I don't know why. I had set up the cameras, gone through the effort, and then I avoided it. Maybe part of me was hoping things would level out on their own. Maybe I didn't want to see something I couldn't unsee. I told myself I was busy with work, that June had been extra clingy, that I'd check it when I had more time. But the truth was simpler. I was scared. Then came Thursday. Erin had said she was staying late again, a curriculum planning meeting. She texted around 6 to say she might just eat with a few of the girls and come home after. I told her to take her time, and when June finally fell asleep around 8, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and opened the laptop. I clicked into the folder marked with the date. The camera feed was clear, better than I expected. The bedroom was empty for most of the day. Just ordinary light shifting across the walls, the occasional creak of the house. I sped forward, watching the hours compress into moments. At 6:41 p.m., the bedroom door opened. Erin walked in. She wasn't alone. I didn't recognize him at first, not really. Tall, athletic build, confident posture. He moved like he knew the room. She closed the door behind them quietly. No fumbling. No hesitation. She smiled at him in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Bright, unguarded, almost bashful. He reached for her waist, and she leaned into it without missing a beat. They didn't speak much. Just gestures, half-laughs, soft touches that felt too familiar to be new. He kissed her, and she pulled him toward the bed like she'd done it 100 times. The image froze me. It wasn't the act itself that gutted me. It was how easy it all looked. How practiced. How much of her was already gone from me by the time she stepped through that door. I paused the video right before they lay down. I couldn't keep watching. My mouth was dry. My body felt hot, then cold. I sat there in silence, the glow of the paused footage flickering on my face like some kind of cruel mirror. And then, like clockwork, the self-doubt came crawling in. Is this my fault? Was I not enough? Did I miss a chance to stop this before it started? But deep down, I knew better. Whatever this was, it wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision, one that had clearly been made long before I ever suspected a thing. I closed the laptop and sat back, staring up at the ceiling. The same ceiling Erin and I had once painted together while listening to a stupid playlist called Songs to Get Paint on Each Other to. I wanted to punch something. I wanted to scream. But nothing came. Just this strange, heavy quiet. Like grief, but sharper. Around 11:20, I heard the front door open. Erin's keys jingled, followed by her usual footsteps across the tile. I stayed where I was, frozen in the dark. She peeked into the living room, her face lit by the hallway light. "Hey," she said casually. "Everything okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She smiled. "Same here. I'm gonna shower." And with that, she walked away, unaware that everything had changed. That I had seen her face in a moment she probably thought she'd never have to answer for. That I had finally stopped guessing. And now, all I could think about was what came next. I slept in the guest room that night. Not that I slept much. The bed was too small, the blankets were stiff from disuse, and the air felt sharp. But I stayed there anyway, just lying on my side, eyes open, playing the video over in my mind again and again, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't help it. Her smile. The way he touched her like it was routine. The way she welcomed it. The next morning, I got up early. June was already stirring in her crib, so I went to get her before Erin could. I changed her, gave her breakfast, and let her watch cartoons in the living room. Erin eventually wandered in, still in her robe, eyes puffy. She gave me a soft morning, like everything was fine. I looked at her for a long time before I answered. Just nodded. No smile. Around noon, while Erin was upstairs folding laundry, I changed the locks on the front and back doors. I'd already called a locksmith earlier that morning. Told him I lost my keys and didn't want to take any chances. He didn't ask questions. The whole thing took 20 minutes. By the time Erin came downstairs, the doors were brand new. She didn't notice right away. That afternoon, I called my office. Told them I'd be working remotely for the rest of the week. I also called HR and had a difficult conversation, one I never thought I'd have. Because here's the thing, Erin didn't just cheat on me. She worked for me. I hired her part-time last year to help with education-focused outreach at our company. She was smart, qualified, and at the time, still someone I trusted completely. So when I told HR that we'd need to sever her contract immediately, there were a few raised eyebrows. But I didn't explain. I didn't have to. I followed protocol. I made sure it was legal. I removed her access to the internal systems and sent the official notice to her email. It was done by 3 p.m. She got the email notification while we were both home. I was in the kitchen feeding June a snack when I heard her footsteps coming fast down the hallway. "What the hell is this?" she said, holding her phone up. "You fired me?" I didn't even look at her. "It's taken care of. You'll receive your final paycheck by the end of the week." "Are you serious right now?" she snapped. "You don't even have the decency to talk to me before?" "I saw the video," I said quietly, just loud enough to cut through her voice. She stopped. "What video?" she asked, but her voice was smaller now. I looked up at her, and in that moment, I felt everything: betrayal, heartbreak, humiliation, but none of it showed. I kept my voice calm. "The one from our bedroom. Tuesday night." "You know which one." Her face drained of color. She looked down at the floor, then back at me, eyes wide. I can explain." "No," I said. "You can't. I swear, it wasn't." "I don't care," I said. My voice was still low, even. "This conversation's over. You can grab your things." You're not staying here tonight. She stared at me like I just hit her. You're kicking me out? You made your choice. This is mine. What about June? She asked, and for the first time, there was real panic in her voice. She stays here. She has stability here. You can figure out visitation when you've had time to collect yourself. This is my house too, she said weakly. No, I said. It's not. The house is in my name. You know that. I gave her 1 hour. I watched her from the kitchen as she walked upstairs and started throwing things into a duffel bag carelessly, frantically, like someone trying to outrun a fire. I heard drawers slam, zippers tugged hard, shoes tossed into the hallway. June sat beside me the whole time, quietly chewing on her crackers, unaware of the storm upstairs. When Erin came down with her bag over her shoulder, I handed her a box. Here, I said. Your bathroom stuff. I already packed it. I had done it earlier that morning while she was out running errands. Toothbrush. Hair products. That gold bracelet she always left by the sink. All of it in the box. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something. Apologize? Beg? Defend herself again? I don't know. But I raised a hand, just enough to stop her. No more lies, Erin. No more anything. She stepped out the door slowly, turned to look at me one last time, and found it already closing. I locked it behind her. And then, for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I breathed. The first morning after Erin was gone, the house felt like it had been unplugged from the wall. The silence wasn't peaceful yet. It was raw and echoing, like the aftermath of a storm where everything's still standing, but just barely. I walked through the rooms like a stranger, not because I didn't recognize them, but because they no longer felt like mine and hers. They were just mine now. Me and June. She asked about her mom, of course. Not in a big dramatic way, just small, casual questions kids ask when their world doesn't line up quite right. Is mommy working late again? Why isn't mommy putting me to bed tonight? I told her the truth, in pieces small enough for her age. Mommy's living somewhere else for a while. You're safe here with me. That was the one I repeated most. I threw myself into fatherhood in a way I hadn't before. Not because I was trying to prove anything, just because I needed a place to pour all the love that had nowhere else to go. I started waking up earlier to make breakfast for her before daycare. I rearranged my work schedule to pick her up every afternoon. I built her a reading corner in the living room with pillows and twinkle lights, just because I knew she'd love it. That part of life, at least, had clarity. She needed me, and I showed up. The rest? It was harder. Nights were the worst at first. I'd sit on the couch with a drink in hand and stare at the walls, half watching shows I didn't care about, half waiting for some feeling of resolution that never really came. Friends started reaching out more. My brother offered to come over. One of my coworkers gently suggested therapy. I wasn't ready for that yet. I didn't want to unpack it with someone who didn't know the story, who didn't see it. I wasn't ready to hear myself say the words out loud. But something shifted around the 6-week mark. It was a Sunday. I had just dropped June off at her grandmother's for the weekend, and I went to a quiet coffee shop I used to love, but hadn't stepped into in over a year. It smelled like cinnamon and books. I sat at the window with my laptop and tried to write something, anything, just to get out of my own head. I couldn't focus. So I just stared out at the street, watching people walk by, feeling like I was watching a world I'd been away from too long. That's when I met her. Her name was Lauren. She asked if she could borrow the outlet under my table. I said yes. She laughed, said thanks, then sat down across from me when the place filled up. We talked for over an hour, not about anything deep, just enough to feel real. She was warm, thoughtful. She didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer it. It felt good to just exist next to someone without the weight of history pressing between us. We exchanged numbers. Slowly, cautiously, we started texting. Then coffee again. Then lunch. It wasn't a romance, not yet. It was a lifeline, a reminder that not every connection has to hurt. I still thought about Erin. Not as often, not always with pain. Sometimes just as a shape that used to take up space in my life. Sometimes with anger, sometimes with indifference. But the obsession was gone. The weight of trying to understand her had finally lifted. I realized one night, while brushing my teeth, that I hadn't checked her social media in weeks. That I didn't care what she was doing. That I no longer looked for her in every quiet moment. It wasn't healing all at once. It never is. But I was building something again. Not a life after the betrayal, but a life beyond it. With my daughter. With peace. And maybe, just maybe, with someone new. I was learning that heartbreak didn't mean I was broken. People always talk about closure like it's some clean, cinematic moment. A letter, a confrontation, an apology that ties the whole mess together with a bow. But the truth is, closure never came for me. Not in the way I thought it would. No final showdown. No confession that made the betrayal make sense. And weirdly, that's okay. It's been almost a year since Erin walked out of our front door for the last time. The divorce finalized quietly. No dramatic court battles, no screaming matches, just a few signatures and a deep, tired silence between us that said everything we weren't going to. She cried when we split custody. I didn't. I had cried enough. June adjusted better than I expected. Kids are resilient in ways adults forget how to be. There were rough patches, nights she asked for her mom, mornings she didn't want to leave my side, but they passed. I've kept her world as steady as I can, and now, when she laughs, it doesn't sound weighed down anymore. That's how I measure progress, by the lightness in her voice. Lauren and I still talk. We've taken things slow, intentionally, gently. I've told her most of the story now, not because I needed to, but because I wanted her to know where I came from. She didn't flinch. She just listened, the way someone does when they're not waiting for their turn to talk. We've gone on a few real dates now. There's something calm about being with someone who isn't trying to fill your silence. Just share it. I moved out of the house last month. I sold it quietly and found a smaller place across town. Simpler, quieter hours. It's just June and me, and a little backyard where we planted tomatoes last weekend. I miss the old place sometimes, but not for what it was, for what I thought it meant. Letting it go felt like the last piece of that old life loosening its grip. As for Erin, I don't hate her. I thought I would. I wanted to. But hate is too heavy to carry forever, and it takes up space I need for better things. I don't know what's going on in her world now. I don't ask. Sometimes she texts to check on June, and I keep it civil. I don't know her rage anymore. I don't know her anything at all. The thing is, betrayal doesn't just blow up your trust in the person who betrayed you. It shakes your belief in your own judgment. For a long time, I felt ashamed of what I didn't see. I replayed memories like I was looking for red flags with a magnifying glass. But that's not living. That's just punishing yourself for loving someone the way they asked to be loved. Now, I'm learning to live differently. I read more. I call my brother just to say hi. I cook meals that don't come from a microwave. I sing to my daughter off-key while brushing her teeth, and I've started running again, not to outrun anything, just to feel my own lungs working. It's the little things that mark recovery, not the big victories. I'm not healed completely. I still have nights where I stare at the ceiling and wonder what I missed. I still have mornings where the air feels too quiet, and I remember, just for a second, what it was like to have someone in that space beside me. But I don't ache the way I used to. The hurt doesn't own me anymore. I thought the affair would be the end of me, but it wasn't. It was the end of something, yes. But it was also the beginning of a version of myself I hadn't met yet, one that's quieter, sharper, and stronger than the one who walked into this mess with blind trust. So no, I didn't get closure. I got something better. I got myself back.